So, as promised, we're going to start this video by talking about feelings. Feelings are a type of bottom-up emotional experience that we very rarely see in the opening stages of treatment. Feelings are the kinds of things that Darwin was talking about when he said that emotions were adaptive and that they were placed by evolution to give us advantages in predicting what's going to happen in the future. As I say, we very rarely see these in the opening stages of treatment. These are the kinds of things that we are hoping to see more of, and we're in fact guiding our clients to experience more and more of. We want them to depend on their feelings rather than listening to some of their emotions. Part of what I tell people about feelings is that feelings are information. They're something for us to evaluate. They're not orders for us to obey. If you feel something or you're experiencing something and it feels like an order to obey, I'm going to tell you right now that it's not really a feeling. It's an emotion of a different type, and we'll talk more about the different types here shortly. But if you feel something or experience something and you're believing that you have to follow through on it, it feels almost compulsory that you do it, then we're not talking about a real feeling. The second of the 5 types of emotions are the bypassed emotions. Bypassed emotions started out as feelings, but they started out as feelings of a particular kind. They started out as very painful experiences that the person experiencing them was unable to regulate successfully at the time. And so they just never fully experienced them. This is something that happens frequently. It's something that we've all had happen to us. Parenting is not perfect. We have emotional experiences, some of which are caused by our parents, some of which our parents are never aware of, that we're too young to handle, and they don't help us handle appropriately or help us handle them enough. And so we're stuck with things that we learn from them. Earlier, we talked about where beliefs come from. This is where beliefs come from. The kinds of dysfunctional beliefs that we focus on in treatment come from the experience of bypassing these emotions. We believe at some point that if we accept certain things on faith, for instance, somebody hurt me, and so I decide I'm never going to trust anyone again, or I'm never going to trust my mom again, or I'm never going to trust my dad again, or I'm never going to trust any man ever again, or whatever it is that we take in our 3 or 4-year-old level of magical thinking as the truth, will then lead us to extremely difficult belief systems that we then can't shake loose of very easily. Because they're held in place defensively, because we keep them to help us avoid dealing with this extremely painful bypassed emotion that we're concerned will again become part of our lives. They don't respond to logic. They respond to the same kind of logic that emotions respond to, which is not linear left brain head logic. It's much more circular, indirect, emotional heart logic. And so if we try to undo those through a very linear process like cognitive behavioral therapy, we're doomed to fail. And unfortunately, most of the other processes that we have developed, including acupressure and tapping and all sorts of other things, we still use them in a very linear way. We tend to try to use EMDR in a very linear way. And so we find that even when we relieve a certain amount of suffering, often we don't relieve the belief systems that built up to defend those bypassed emotions. Another thing that makes them important, remember we talked about earlier, emotions direct behavior, and emotions don't have to be conscious. Even when they're unconscious, they still direct behavior. So something can be unconscious because I don't want to look at it anymore. But even if that's true, it's still going to affect my behavior. And so I have this submerged emotion plus whatever else is going on in my life. And together, however I'm feeling in the bypassed pain, however that is, has some hand in determining my behavior, along with all of the ways that I'm defending against it. The behavior that results from the bypassed emotion, plus all the defenses, is what we therapists tend to call symptomatic behavior. A third type of emotion is the defensive emotion. Typically, where the bypassed emotion was very painful, the defensive emotion is less painful but much more stressful. Although any emotion can be used to defend against other emotions. There's an entire hierarchy of emotions. And so, for instance, pride feels better than anger, so I can use my pride to defend against my anger, and anger feels better than craving, so I can use my anger to keep from craving, and craving feels better than fear, so I'd rather be addicted than be scared, but fear feels better than sadness, and sadness feels better than guilt, and guilt feels better than shame, and shame feels better than being unlovable or being worthless. Very typically, we see people adopt defensive emotions where they might be angry to avoid feeling guilty. Or they might feel proud to avoid feeling shame. But sometimes you see people using even some very primitive kinds of things, like holding on to chronic guilt to keep from feeling worthless. They use one thing to defend against something even more basic. When we have people present to us in therapy, and we talk about emotional problems, typically what we're talking about are their defensive emotions. When people present to therapy, pretty much what they present with are things like depression, anxiety, hostility, chronic guilt, craving. All of those are very frequently used as defensive emotions or defensive behavior. None of those are exactly real. And the question becomes, if we realize that they're using anger to defend against shame, or they're using depression to defend against grief, which is also very common, how do we deal with that best? Do we question their beliefs? Do we go after the defensive emotions? Because these are very much top-down emotions. Defensive behavior is very much a top-down process when we're looking at it as an emotion. This is something where feelings are bottom up and bypassed start as bottom up, but then are blocked from expression. Defensive emotions are very much top down. And so this is something that very easily we can question their beliefs. And these are the kinds of things that CBT works at. We do send people to cognitive behavioral anger management to deal with their hostility. We do have good CBT protocols for depression and anxiety. The question is, do we really want to focus on that if we know that what that is defending something behind it? It's defending guilt, it's defending shame, it's defending worthlessness, it's defending extreme fear or grief. And that's a very difficult question to answer 100%. But I would say what I've found is that 95% of the time, you really don't have to deal with defensive emotions directly. What you want to do instead is deal with the bypassed emotion. If you can take the bypassed emotion out, the defensive emotion has no reason to exist anymore, and then it becomes much easier to uproot.